Richard Nelson wiped the warm saliva from his cheek, disbelief coloring his thoughts. The laughter from the surrounding officers felt like a slap to his resolve. This wasn't just some casual encounter. It was the moment he realized he had stepped into the lion's den, and he was determined to face the beast that lurked within. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" he asked calmly, his voice deliberately steady despite the storm wrenching within him. Officer Daniels leaned in closer, a smug sneer plastered across his face as if he had just won some ridiculous game. "Only folks like you," he shot back, and the laughter erupted once again. It echoed off the walls, fueling Richard's anger but also hardening his purpose. Instead of retaliating, Richard turned on his heel and walked purposefully down the narrow hallway, each step echoing the resolve building within him. He had come undercover, a calculated risk to witness the ethos of this department firsthand. Now, more than ever, he understood that the journey to reforming this precinct would be his life's work. As the intercom lit up with the call for a briefing, Richard veered toward the main office, his mind racing with strategies. Would the officers who had laughed at his humiliation even recognize their errors? Did they even care? He entered the briefing room stealthily, positioning himself just out of sight, arms folded as he silently observed. Officers filed in, chattering mindlessly about mundane topics, the laughter still ringing like nails on a chalkboard. At the front, Captain Harris stood, ready to introduce the new chief. "All right, settle down, everyone. I'm pleased to announce our new chief of police," Harris began, the crowd's attention shifting. "Please welcome Richard Nelson." Richard stepped forward, placing a folder on the lectern, the silence falling over the room like a heavy blanket. His gaze landed on Daniels, who was now pale as a ghost. "Good morning," Richard said, feeling the weight in his own voice. "My name is Richard Nelson, and today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this precinct." The silence was palpable, not just any silence, but one thick with the apprehension of realization, a tension that reeked of impending confrontation. Daniels's bravado crumbled as Richard continued, eyes scanning those gathered. "I witnessed something appalling this morning. Several officers laughed at what they believed was merely a chance encounter with a nobody, but what you laughed at was the dignity of my presence." Rumors swirled through the room like smoke, but Richard raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "Respect is not optional," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "It's the backbone of law enforcement. Without it, we fail, not just each other, but the community we serve." Richard locked eyes with Daniels, who fidgeted under the weight of his gaze. The past was not lost on Richard. He had done his homework, and he listed the names of allegations against Daniels, abusive behavior and racial bias, all buried under years of complacency. "Today, we're taking a stance," Richard declared. "Effective immediately. Officer Daniels is suspended pending an internal investigation." Gasps broke through the crowd. Daniels flushed angrily, the shame mingling with rage as he glanced around, desperate for an ally among his peers. Richard ignored him, watching as the officers processed the gravity of what had just occurred. "All officers who think this is just a slap on the wrist should rethink their values," he continued. "Because a line has been drawn, and if you can't rise to meet it, then this isn't the place for you." With that, Richard stepped back from the podium, allowing his words to linger. He knew this was just the beginning, a mere flashpoint in the battle ahead. He was prepared to confront the resistance that would certainly follow, fueled not by anger but by the necessity of change. As officers filed out, nearly silent, Richard remained. This was a pivotal moment. The echoes of his words still vibrated in the air. It wouldn't be easy, but today, just maybe, he had planted the seeds of change. Captain Harris approached cautiously. "You really made an impact," he said, a hint of admiration in his tone. Richard nodded, not letting the fleeting sense of victory envelop him just yet. The real work was about to begin, and he wouldn't relent until the precinct was a place of honor and respect, not just for officers but for the community they served. Rounding his desk in the dim after-hours light, Richard pulled out his notes, the tension in his chest unresolved. His phone buzzed, a message from the community outreach officer wanting to meet immediately about a public relations crisis brewing. Officer Daniels had already started laying the groundwork to fight back. With resolve tightening within him, Richard smiled grimly. He was ready for whatever would come next. Change was a battle worth fighting, and he would meet it head-on, no matter the cost. Richard stayed at his phone, the harsh glow illuminating his determined expression. Officer Daniels was already plotting a public relations counterattack, a strategy designed to undermine Richard's authority and spin his suspension into a scandal. He couldn't let that happen. The stakes were too high, and the community deserved better than a department riddled with toxic behavior. "I need to meet with a community outreach officer now," he murmured to himself, his resolve solidifying. Picking up his jacket, he exited his office and navigated the now quiet precinct, each step echoing with purpose. The energy that had once buzzed with laughter had dissipated. Now, only the hushed whispers of doubt lingered in the air. As he approached the community outreach office, the door was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of light to escape. He knocked gently, pushing the door open to find Officer Elena Torres, a spirited woman with dark hair pulled back tightly, tapping furiously on her laptop. She looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of Richard. "Chief Nelson," she said, the surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect you here so soon. I was just about to draft a message about Daniel's suspension." "Which is exactly why I'm here," Richard replied, stepping into the room. "We need to control this narrative before it spirals out of hand. I'm getting reports that Daniels is trying to paint me as an extremist. I need you to help me reach the community before he does." Elena nodded, her brow furrowing in thought. "I already have a few ideas. We could hold a town hall meeting. Transparency is best when it comes to repairing trust. We can address their concerns directly and show that we're committed to positive change." "That's a great start," Richard agreed, but he could see the hesitation in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "It's just, there's a lot of skepticism. Not just from the community, but from within the department too. Some officers may not be on board with this new approach. They've been part of the old culture for years." "Then we have to tackle that head-on. We can't afford to shy away from hard conversations," he said, his voice firm. "Let's draft a press release to promote the town hall. I want to emphasize that we're eager to rebuild the trust that's been lost." They worked quickly, and by the time they finished, Richard felt an invigorating surge of hope. With their combined efforts, they created a message that was clear and transparent. It called for an open discussion about the department's future, all questions welcome. As Richard read through the final draft one more time, his phone buzzed again. It was a text from Captain Harris. "We need to talk. Some of the officers aren't happy. They are pushing back. Meet me in the conference room. Tension creeping back into his shoulders, Richard glanced through the glass pane of the office at the now empty hallway, where murmurs of discontent were inevitable. "We'll get this sent out immediately," he told Elena. "But I need to handle the situation with Harris first. Can you take it from here?" "Of course, Chief," she answered, enthusiasm flickering back to life as she prepared to share their plan with the rest of the department. He could see her determination, and it reminded him that not everyone was resistant to change, though he knew he would need to prove that to the rest of the staff. When he entered the conference room, Harris was already waiting, his arms crossed and a frown etched across his face. "You need to rein in the officers, Richard. They are unsettled about the suspension. Some think it's a blatant overreach. I'm not here to win popularity contests, Captain. We've been letting unacceptable behavior slide for too long. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, we're resigning our commitment to the community." "I get that," Harris said, a hint of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "But there's a way to do this without creating more strife. You have to remember, some of these officers are questioning your approach already." Richard studied his captain carefully, weighing his words. "Then let's address the questions openly. How many deserve to be punished versus how many can simply be redirected? This is about changing hearts and minds." "You're playing a dangerous game, Chief," Harris warned, though his resolve wavered slightly. "Some officers may take your words as a threat. You need to show them you're a team player, too." Richard felt a wave of determination wash over him as conflicting thoughts battled within. It wasn't just about being a team player. It was about reforming a deeply flawed culture. If they can't handle the changes, perhaps they don't belong in this precinct. "Just be careful," Harris said, sighing. "I'll support you, but the road ahead could end up being rocky." Richard nodded, feeling the gravity of the captain's words. "That's a risk I'm willing to take. We'll engage with the community, and we'll show them we stand for integrity and respect." With renewed conviction, Richard left the conference room, feeling the weight of the department on his shoulders. As he strolled back, his mind raced. He had to act quickly, knowing the officers were likely discussing their takes on his leadership. Moments later, he returned to his office, where he initiated the press release with Elena. With one click, they sent it out, announcing the town hall meeting designed for community engagement. Responses began to roll in from residents excited for change, but Richard knew he needed more than that. He needed the officers on board. As the weeks went on, tensions simmered in the precinct. Daniels, now suspended but not defeated, began whispering to his allies, seeding doubt about Richard's leadership. Richard felt it in the air around him, the murmurs growing louder each day, and it terrified him. But one evening, as Richard worked late preparing for the upcoming town hall, a familiar face appeared at the door. Officer Reyes, the young recruit who had pledged to do better. She stepped in hesitantly. "Chief," she greeted, flicking nervous glances around the room. "Reyes, what's up?" Richard asked, hoping that she brought news of solidarity amidst the chaos. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, stepping closer and lowering her voice. "I overheard something the other day about Officer Daniels and a few others planning a protest against you." The word struck Richard like a thunderclap. "What do you mean? A protest?" "Yeah, they're not happy with how you're handling things. They think you're about to cut ties with a lot of seasoned officers who have been here forever." Richard clenched his fists, his frustration boiling. "That's exactly what I've been trying to prevent. The old culture that disrespects our community. If they choose to protest, it'll only hurt them in the end." "I know, but they're desperate. They feel threatened," Reyes pressed, her voice shaking slightly. "I think they are planning to confront you at the town hall." Richard's mind raced as he considered the implications of the protest. This could either become a pivotal teaching moment or lead to disaster. But he couldn't back down, not now. He looked at Reyes, making a decision in his mind. "Thank you for telling me. It's vital that I have insight from those willing to be honest." She nodded, visibly relieved, and Richard felt something shift. With every ally he made, the vision of a transformed department became clearer. He could feel the wheels turning already. The foundation of change was built on courage and honesty, and it was time to show them both. "Let's prepare for this," he said, determination reigniting within him. "The town hall will be a place for every officer's voice, including those who dissent. If we're to move forward together, we need to face the challenges head-on." As Reyes left, the adrenaline coursed through him like fire. This was an opportunity to confront the dissent, to show that he wouldn't shy away from their fears but instead engage with them constructively. He would turn the protest into a dialogue, a chance for change, a path toward healing. Richard knew the road ahead would be turbulent, but fortified by the loyalty around him, he stood ready to challenge the very system intent on undermining him. The fight for a better precinct had just begun, and he would lead the charge. Richard adjusted his tie, feeling the heaviness of the moment ahead. The town hall meeting loomed just hours away, and the tension in the precinct was palpable. The whispers about the impending protest had spread like wildfire, and he could sense the unease from both officers and community members alike. Today would be a test, not just for his leadership, but for the future of the department. As he approached the town hall venue, the clamor of voices filled the air. A mixture of anxiety and excitement buzzed around the entrance, where community members had started to gather. Richard could already see a few officers milling about, their expressions a blend of skepticism and defiance. He took a deep breath, pushing through the front doors as he stepped onto the raised platform. The room fell silent, every eye drawn to him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "This is a space for you, an opportunity to share your concerns and expectations. I want to hear from you." Community members shifted in their seats, and Richard noticed a small group of officers standing off to the side, exchanging hushed comments. He focused on the faces in the crowd. He needed them to see that he meant business. "A lot has changed recently," Richard continued. "Our mission is to serve and protect our community with integrity and respect. However, I recognize that trust has been broken, and it's my responsibility to rebuild that." At the mention of trust, murmurs swept through the crowd. Richard took a step closer, trying to connect with the people. "I understand that many of you feel apprehensive about the police," he said, leaning slightly forward. "That's why I've invited every officer here, not only to listen but to engage with you personally." Before he could finish, a hand shot up from the back, and Richard recognized it as Officer Daniels, who had snuck in. The officers behind him looked tense, arms crossed defiantly. "What makes you think we need the community's input?" Daniels challenged, his tone dripping with disdain. "We've done our jobs for years." The crowd gasped, eyes darting between Richard and the audacious officer. "Officer Daniels," Richard said, maintaining eye contact, "your perspective is invaluable, and I welcome the opportunity to engage. But today isn't about defending the past. It's about shaping a better future." Daniels smirked, his bravado fueled by the support of his small group of allies. "You think we need a public forum to do our jobs? We're trained professionals. We don't need everyone second-guessing our moves." Richard felt a tremor of frustration ripple through him. Officers had been trained to protect, but they also needed to learn to listen, something this precinct had long neglected. "It's not about second-guessing. It's about accountability," he asserted, feeling the words lighten his weighty resolve. "If we don't engage, we risk further alienating the community we swore to protect." The room grew tense, and Richard could sense the tide beginning to turn. More community members chimed in now, voices rising alongside their frustrations. "I've had bad experiences with officers before," shouted a woman in the front row. "Why should we trust you?" Richard took a step back, allowing their concerns to resonate. "You shouldn't have to trust us blindly. Trust is earned, and that's why we're here today, to foster dialogue. The only way to move forward is to speak honestly about your experiences." Daniels laughed derisively from the side, but Richard chose to ignore him, reaching out to the crowd. "Tell me about your experiences. Share your stories. Let's work through this together." An elderly man in the front row stood up, his voice shaky but passionate. "I've lived in this community for over 50 years. There's a divide between us and the police. We feel ignored and dismissed when we reach out. What will you do about that?" Richard nodded, the urgency of the man's words sharpening his focus. "I'm committed to creating community policing initiatives, officers on the streets getting to know their neighborhoods, establishing mentorship programs for our youth. This isn't about creating more rules. It's about rebuilding connections." As he spoke, the crowd began to lean in, encouraged by the direction of the conversation. Even some officers who had previously stood against him started to nod subtly. Suddenly, Daniels shot another barb from the crowd. "And what about officers like me who have done their jobs right? Are we going to be punished for the few bad apples?" Richard took a deep breath, knowing the importance of approaching this moment carefully. "No one is here to punish good officers," he clarified. "You are valued, and I appreciate those who do their jobs well. But accountability is crucial in eradicating a culture of complacency." It's about setting higher standards for all of us. As the meeting progressed, Richard could see the protests slowly morphing into something unexpected, an opportunity for growth rather than division. The community members felt empowered, and some of the officers began engaging too, sharing their frustrations and hopes for the precinct's future. After nearly 2 hours, he noticed the once guarded expressions softening. The town hall conversation now flowed with an undercurrent of hope and resolution. Despite the challenges ahead, Richard sensed that even Daniel's presence couldn't extinguish the flicker of unity. In the closing moments, as the atmosphere shifted toward collaboration, Richard made sure to emphasize the importance of everyone's voice. Each person in this room matters. Your thoughts count. Your experiences matter. Together, we can create a precinct that reflects the values we all share. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard looked around the room, feeling a spark of optimism glimmering. He was ready to embrace the challenges ahead, knowing that change wouldn't come easily, but it was certainly possible. On his way out, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Officer Reyes, who had been quietly listening in the back. "You did really well," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "I think things are starting to shift." "Thanks, Reyes. But the real work starts now. We have a long way to go." "I can't do this alone," Richard replied, feeling the weight of responsibility rest firmly on his shoulders. Suddenly, he realized that there was one voice he hadn't heard during the meeting: Daniel's. The officer had slipped out midway, and Richard knew he had to address that. "Did you see where Daniels went?" Richard asked Reyes, his brow furrowing. "Last I saw, he was heading toward the parking lot." Richard nodded, his instincts kicking in. "I need to talk to him. If it's going to continue being a problem, we need to confront this directly before it escalates." Rushing to the exit, Richard spotted Daniel's uniform disappearing around the corner of the building. He quickened his pace, determination coursing through him. This was a moment to address the dissent head-on and make clear that he was going to stand firm, no matter the resistance. "Officer Daniels." Richard called after him, his voice firm. The officer paused, turning slowly, annoyance evident on his face. "We need to talk." Daniels stopped but didn't turn back, casting a wary glance over his shoulder. "About what?" "Your little town hall? That doesn't change the fact that I'm out of a job." Richard stepped closer, determination flashing in his gaze. "It changes everything, Daniels. I'm willing to work with you if you're willing to engage in this process honestly. But if you choose to resist, you will find yourself in deeper water than you can imagine." Daniels finally turned around, sarcasm dripping from his words. "You think I'm just going to roll over because you held a few meetings? This is how things have always been." Richard leveled his gaze, refusing to back down. "And this is why we need to change. The old ways won't work anymore. And trust me, I won't let anyone undermine that. Not even you. We'll either move forward together as a department, or I'll ensure every officer understands that toxic behavior has no place here." For a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Daniel's face before it hardened into anger. "You can't intimidate me, Chief." "No, but I can show you the consequences if you continue to undermine our efforts," Richard replied firmly. "Your actions not only affect your job, they affect the lives of those in this community. Is that really the legacy you want to leave?" Richard watched as uncertainty flashed across Daniel's expression. The officer's bravado faltered, just for a moment, but through that crack, Richard saw a glimmer of potential for conversation. "I'll consider what you've said," Daniels grumbled, though Richard wasn't ready to take that at face value. "Consider it carefully, Daniels, because we're moving forward, with or without you." With that, Richard turned away, feeling the rush of adrenaline start to fade. He had taken a necessary step, but the real challenge lay ahead. Change wouldn't be a smooth journey, it was going to be a fight. But he couldn't back down, not now. The stakes were too high, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that genuine hope was within reach. Richard stood outside the town hall, the cool evening air brushing against his skin, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room just moments before. He glanced back at the doors, which had just closed behind him after an intense confrontation with Officer Daniels. A mix of satisfaction and concern swirled within him. He had stood his ground, but the real work was just beginning. As he walked toward his car in the nearly empty parking lot, his mind replayed the evening's events. The community's response was promising, but the challenge of unifying the department remained urgent. Change often met resistance, and if Daniels was any indication, the old ways wouldn't go down without a fight. Sliding into the driver's seat, he took a moment to gather his thoughts, feeling the weight of his responsibilities. Just as he was about to start the engine, his phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a message from Elena. Meeting tomorrow at 9 to discuss follow-up strategies for community outreach. Bring your ideas, He smiled, encouraged. A strong team mattered more than anything else, and Elena was an integral part of his vision for reform. He quickly replied, confirming he'd be there and that he'd prepared some new initiatives to propose. Settling back in the seat, Richard couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. Despite the warmth of the support he'd received during the town hall, he knew the dark shadows loomed strong within the department. He had to act swiftly. He glanced at the clock. It was running late. Tomorrow needed to be different. Arriving home, Richard prepared a light dinner, his mind still racing. The sound of the news in the background faded into the furniture around him. He clicked it off, preferring stillness as he chewed thoughtfully on his meal. The community's voices echoed in his ears, their dreams and concerns blending with the urgency of change. He finished eating and sat down at his small desk, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating his notepad. Ideas for the next day poured out of him: community workshops, mentorship programs, accountability initiatives for officers. Each stroke of his pen felt like laying down a stepping stone toward a new beginning. Just as he was finishing up, his phone rang again. This time it was Captain Harris. "Hey, Richard," he said, a hint of weariness in his voice. "We need to talk. Can we meet at the precinct?" Richard felt a ripple of trepidation. "What's on your mind, Captain?" "It's about some backlash I'm hearing from the officers after the town hall. There's talk of pushing back harder against your changes. We need to strategize on how to address this before it escalates." Richard's resolve only hardened in response. "Let's meet now. The urgency is too great to wait." After a few minutes, he drove back to the precinct, the floodlights illuminating the building like a beacon amidst the encroaching darkness. He stepped inside, where the conversations within had morphed into hushed murmurs, and the air was thick with uncertainty. In the conference room, Harris was already waiting, his expression serious. "I appreciate you coming back. We need to nip this in the bud." "I agree," Richard said, leaning forward in his chair. "Tell me what you know." Some officers feel cornered. They believe that introducing community involvement means they'll have less power over their own decisions. They think it's a threat rather than a guide to better practices. Daniels has been rallying support, and it's turning into a small faction against you. Richard's brows knit together, frustration rising. Counterproductive to the spirit of our efforts. We're not dismantling authority. We're enhancing it with accountability. If they can't see that, we need to shine light on the benefits of change. Harris nodded, running a hand through his hair. They need to feel included in the process. Perhaps an open forum, just among the officers, could be the answer. Let them vent their frustrations, alleviate fears, and help shape the direction. What if those officers refuse to engage? "It's a risk," Richard said, considering the potential fallout. "Better to have them air it out calmly among themselves than let resentment simmer," Harris suggested. "If we can't bridge the gap between community expectations and officer apprehension, we'll only create further divides." Richard weighed the suggestion, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. "All right, let's organize it. An open forum for the officers. We need to emphasize teamwork and collective goals." "Good. I think it'll allow for some honest feedback," Harris replied, relief evident. As they discussed logistics, Richard visualized the meeting, the potential breakthroughs, but also the hurdles. He felt his heart race, ready to tackle the next set of challenges head-on. Hours later, they wrapped up their planning, and as he walked out of the precinct, his heart did something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. It lifted with purpose. Tomorrow would be a pivotal day. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, contrasting the heavy atmosphere he expected to encounter. He arrived at the precinct early, the day's agenda fresh in his mind. Officers trickled in, some wearing apprehensive expressions while others were surprisingly welcoming. Richard gathered everyone in the spacious meeting room, positioning himself to face the assembled officers. "Thank you for being here. Today is about opening channels, addressing fears, and finding collaborative ways to move forward for our community and for ourselves." Daniel stood off to the side, arms crossed, a defiant stance. Richard struck a familiar chord. If we don't speak up for one another, we risk losing not just our community's trust but ours within the force. Slowly but surely, voices began to rise from all corners of the room. Some echoed apprehensions. Others expressed uncertainties about the changes ahead. Richard listened intently, keeping the dialogue constructive. When it was Daniel's turn, he stood, narrowing his gaze. "You say accountability, but what about our rank? What about our veterans' input?" Richard nodded, the importance of traditions ringing true. "Veterans bring invaluable experience. I'm not eliminating ranks. I want to create a bridge between experience and growth. Your voices matter in how we implement these changes." The tension in the room softened slightly, and soon, they were throwing around ideas, possible benefits of mentorship programs and community outreach initiatives. Richard felt momentum building. The berries slowly began to crack. As the meeting concluded, he ended on a hopeful note. "We are a team. Change starts small, and our growth will benefit the community as much as it benefits us." Officers began to express more enthusiasm. Discussions turned constructive. Laughter broke through the tension, and Richard could finally see a glimmer of unity emerging from chaos. In the weeks that followed, the department convened regularly, bridging gaps, fostering trust. Richard witnessed firsthand the power of shared dialogue to dismantle the walls of apprehension. Days turned into months. The tide began to shift. As he so deeply hoped, the precinct transformed through the efforts of community and officers, capturing the essence of what it meant to protect and serve. One evening, as Richard left the precinct after a long day, he caught Officer Reyes watching him from the side. "You did it, Chief. Things are different now." He smiled, feeling the warmth of camaraderie. "We did it. Together." And for the first time in a long while, Richard felt the genuine promise of change radiating from the heart of the precinct. Unity was no longer a distant dream, but an emerging reality. In that moment, he knew they had taken the first steps towards a brighter, more connected future.